I don't think that there is an inherent, like, let's say, objective value in storytelling. I just believe that our anthropomorphic existence, like our human existence,
Yeah.
is somehow contingent on it. And I don't know, it just appeals to the best part of our primal nature, which is, if you think about it, we're multifaceted species, and I think that's part of what made us who we are.
Khaled Sadeq,
Hey Joey,
how are you, man?
good, good.
Good?
Yeah, it's been a long time coming.
It's been long overdue.
Yes.
Finally, we're doing the sit down.
Yeah,
How have you been, man? How's everything?
good. Really busy. Published the book 3 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been really occupying me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you think that after you publish a book that it's done, but little did I know it's a never-ending project.
Was it most of the work before publishing the book or after publishing the
Uh,
book?
so many things to do afterwards.
Yeah,
Looks like the whole marketing aspect is on you,
yeah,
the whole digital aspect, Amazon campaigning. I'm starting to get also now into the whole social media aspect,
yeah. That's very
how to
important, huh?
speak about the book in a way that captures people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
I realize that's also a skill you need to develop. So it's been occupying me, but it's very interesting, just seeing how to take this narrative and make it applicable to the listeners.
Yeah,
How
yeah,
can they extract value from it, which
yeah.
is good.
And have you been having good feedback, good reviews? People are telling you about it. What's
Yes,
happening over there?
yeah, yeah. So funny enough, you're one of the first three people I know who finished the book
Yeah,
so
yeah,
quickly.
yeah.
Yeah, within less than three
Yeah,
months.
yeah, yeah. I was excited. We talked about it a lot. Also during the process, maybe we met when you're about to finish the book, or you already
I was
were
I
finished.
was I was about 75% through.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So I was excited, and the excitement was building up
yes,
because you were very busy with many things,
yeah,
preparing or publishing, etc.
yeah,
So it was pretty
yeah,
interesting.
and I think that's what how we connected. Me and you, we have many common, a lot of common interests,
Hmm.
right? Least of which is sports,
Yeah,
gym, bodybuilding, and also philosophy.
yeah,
And I know you're also trying to incorporate that into your brand somehow,
yeah, yeah,
philosophy and
yeah,
fitness, which
yeah.
is, I think, it's a very nice niche that no one is exploiting yet, which is like quite valuable.
Yeah, I think it dates back really to the ancient Greeks
Yes,
and how they used to view aesthetics and
yes.
physical activity and all
Even
these things.
even
So
the word gym is an
yeah,
ancient Greek
yeah,
terminology, right?
gymnasium.
Gymnasium.
Yeah,
Yeah,
indeed.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, it's interesting, and I'm happy that we're finally doing this
yeah.
and we
Same.
we get to talk about the book.
Yeah.
So I've gathered some questions that while reading the book and overall by knowing you, I've gathered some questions that I would like you to take me through.
Yes.
And before doing that, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, and what led to this book, actually.
Yes. So, yeah, you might think of it from a different angle. It might be a midlife crisis project that I wanted to
Yeah,
embark
yeah,
on.
yeah.
It's like, why would you want to embark on a journey to write this book?
Hmm.
First of all, I think I lived in four different countries, three different continents, and the thing that always sparked my curiosity is how different people in different countries view the world in a different way.
Hmm.
That's not due to intrinsic differences in the individuals themselves,
Hmm.
but I always thought it's due to the differences in the culture and the common narrative that everyone is immersed in the areas where people live.
Hmm.
So yeah, living in Jordan, I was born in Jordan. We
Okay.
migrated to Canada in my adulthood, so I was in my early 20s. I lived in Canada for a long time, and then I was offered a job in Germany, which offered me a completely different lens on looking on life. You know,
Yeah,
when you switch, you move from a Middle Eastern country into North America, and then back to Europe, and all of them are different,
definitely.
structurally different. And then after that, I moved to Holland. I've been living in Amsterdam now almost 4 years. And you do notice you're trying to integrate yourself into the culture. So you have to start adopting certain ways of viewing worldview,
Hmm.
how people interact, behave, and things of that sort. And it's so funny how even like between Amsterdam and Germany, 300 kilometers, but drastically different ways of looking at the world.
Yeah,
Germany is extremely conservative. Amsterdam's on the complete opposite side of
yeah.
liberalism.
Oh, Germany, is it all Germany or is it specific areas in Germany
Yeah,
or
I
in
was
general Germany is more conservative
in
than Germany?
general, I
Okay.
think it is. You can apply to the entire country, but specifically the area where I lived in, it's in North Rhine-Westphalia.
Yeah.
The city's called Bielefeld. They're
Okay.
even known to be more conservative,
Hmm.
even though people are they are billion-dollar companies. People are well-educated, well-traveled, but they have a very conservative way of looking at life.
Okay.
So yeah, going through all of it, it's almost like shapes your character in a way. You gotta blend. You can't just be who you are,
Yeah.
and that forces you to question your like, let's say, previous perceptions, how you're looking at the world.
Hmm.
And I've been working out for 20 years. I can't believe
Wow.
it's been that long.
That's a
Yeah,
lot. That's a
yeah,
big commitment,
yeah,
huh?
it's a long
Yeah.
time. And I always looked at the gym or being active or working out in general as a
Yeah.
way to let off steam. It's not just a thing that you do for your physical appearance, but more so I feel it just helps your mental health,
Hmm.
let out some steam. It helps you just be more grounded, and there is that mind body connection that you start to also explore afterwards. Like, it's not just a thing that you do physically.
Yeah.
There is a lot of mental challenge you need to overcome even while lifting weights or
Definitely.
doing any sort of sports.
Definitely.
But the incident, something happened to me at the gym that made me question, or that seated like the first question that brought about this book.
Yeah.
When I was 25 years old, that's about like 14 years ago. I'm 39 now. I was even at the peak of my physical fitness shape. I think this is when I was like approaching the peak of.
Back then you were at the peak.
Yes, yeah.
Now it went
Yeah, yeah,
downhill,
yeah,
but
yeah. You know how it is. Age creeps in. I'm still trying to sustain it, but you hit a plateau, right? After
yeah,
some
of
time.
course, of course.
And I think right now I'm just still sustaining it. But I was peaking at my physical performance, and I also like the optics.
Hmm.
And I used to work out for 2 years with a very dedicated workout
Yeah,
partner. We used to
I remember
lift.
this story from the book.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I started
yeah,
the book with this
yeah.
story. So we used to lift mad amount of weights, and naturally, everyone at the gym was staring at us. We were living in a white town or area in
In
Canada,
Canada.
and my friend, he was black, and I'm of an Arabic background,
Okay.
so he was also extremely fit. Like, we were both at the same level. When we used to work out, people were staring, and I never paid much attention to it.
Hmm.
I always thought there were stares of admiration
Hmm.
or stares of respect, or
Yeah.
like, if you're into any niche in life, if you're excelling at it, people who are in that journey, they naturally also
Yeah.
just observe and notice it, right? I didn't pay much attention to it, but one day after 6 months, we were out in my condo, we were playing pool, and he shared his thoughts with me, and they shocked me. He said, the people at the gym, they're staring at us because they hate us, because I'm Arabic and he's
Hmm.
also African.
Yeah.
So, just to make his point clear, I understand where he was coming from, because we were facing some stereotype threats embodied in Western culture at the time,
Okay.
and to a degree until now too. But I never saw it from that
Yeah.
perspective. I always saw it that they're admiring, they're respecting, and he saw that they're probably hating, or they're not accepting us.
Hmm.
And in my view, like, it was in that moment I was, you distance yourself from the incident that's happening, and you're like, how can two people with similar backgrounds, similar journey, look at the same objective event and interpret it in such like the opposite way?
Yeah.
That was shocking to me.
Hey, admiration, hatred.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's extremely
Hmm.
shocking. But then when I paid attention to it, I realized how common it is.
Hmm.
In our relationships, it happens in our families, it
Hmm.
happens at work,
Yeah.
it happens everywhere. That is this something like, is there such a thing as an objective reality?
Hmm.
If there is such a thing as an objective reality, why do we interpret it differently?
Yeah.
And I remember, because this is where our common interest comes in. I'm One of my core passions in life is philosophy, which is
Hmm.
philosophy, I think, is just the study of the questions that are governing our lives, which is, what is reality, metaphysics, and
Hmm.
how meta thinking also, to you think about the
Yeah.
thought itself. And the purpose of all of that is, I think, to come up with answers that yield us a more effective way of
Hmm.
living. So I remember I read Kant back when I was a teenager, and maybe the book was a modern outtake on a Kantian concept, which was,
Your book.
yes,
Okay.
Yeah, it was Kant. One of his most popular, I think, concepts in his book. He mentioned the thing in itself,
Hmm.
which is the concept of nomina as
Hmm.
opposed to phenomena.
Hmm.
When you witness a phenomena, you're witnessing the manifestation
Yeah.
of an object or a thing, as opposed to nomina, which is the thing in itself, which are the characteristics and the objective status of the object that are not perceivable to our human eyes. Because the
That are
thing,
not perceivable to our human
yes,
eyes.
because he said the thing in itself
Yeah.
exists regardless of how we perceive it.
Okay.
And there are
Yeah.
characteristics to the thing that are beyond our understanding.
Hmm.
But what we witness is the phenomena, which is
Yes.
its manifestation according to how it maps with our sensory input.
Okay.
That thought also is extremely deep, and it always lingered in my mind. And I'm like, could this be the same thing, but more not in a tangible aspect, but more in our experiential aspect
Yeah. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
we experience the world,
Yeah.
how things come at us from witnessing events unfolding in our immediate environment.
Nice.
So that was like kind of an interesting outtake. So I remember that thought, and that experience kind of seeded that question in my mind, and it lingered there, and it continued. I continued seeing parallel while I was working in my relationships with my family, in our friendship also too was happening. So it stayed there. And what happened is when I moved to Germany, I moved 6 months before the lockdown. And,
Okay.
you
Yeah.
know, just like coming out of the culture shock of
Yeah.
being in Germany. And then, boom, COVID happened.
That's intense.
And as I told you, Germans are holier than thou, or holier than the Pope, as they say, which is they were applying the rules of staying at home
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
strict, very strict. Like they were very strict about it
On themselves. So
on
people
themselves,
were actually
exactly.
following the rules
So
and
I
everything.
was speaking to my friends in Canada or other parts of the world, and everybody was like, you know, I understand we're not supposed to meet, but people were still meeting. But
Uh-huh.
in Germany, when I was reaching out to friends or people, they were like, no, no, we don't want to meet.
Yeah.
So I felt lonely, and I had an extreme and severe depression.
Okay.
I think that was a pivotal moment in my life.
Hmm.
And as I told you before, the gym was an outlet for my mental
Yeah.
stability. The
Was
gym
no gyms
closed
back
down.
then. Yeah.
Yeah. Thankfully, I managed to purchase a bench and some weights. So I used to work out at home.
Okay.
I started getting into yoga, but I had a lot of free time in
Yeah.
between. I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm a very extroverted person too. I love social settings. So that was an extremely depressing moment in my life.
Hmm.
I still remember how intense it was. But as they say, you know, these harsh moments that you go through, if they don't break you, they somehow pivot your view
Yeah.
into a better path, like they
Yeah.
make you somehow. So what happened was I started buying books and I started reading. I was going through a book every week or two.
Yeah. What kind of books? A specific kind of books, or
Yes,
just books in general?
books in general. So I was always like reading books, but it was like a long process. It was taking me 6 months to read a book,
Yeah.
and then at that point, there are many books in my backlog.
Yeah. I remember also that back in COVID, I was so happy because we had a lot of free time.
Exactly.
I had the privilege that I owned my own gym. It was next to the apartment, so I would walk to the gym, train,
Yeah, that's
come
amazing.
back to my book, watch a movie. So it was, for me, it was a positive experience.
Yes, yeah,
So to say the
but as you said, you
yeah.
make, like, you know, as they say in English, it's a blessing in disguise.
Hmm.
But only in retrospect do we see the blessing. And
That's true.
in the moment, it
It
felt too
feels heavy.
intense, right? Yeah,
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 it
yeah,
felt
yeah.
intense. But I completely agree with you. And yeah, I just bought many books. There were many let's say bestsellers or book that has a massive influence on our culture, like The Selfish Gene,
Yes.
Thinking Fast and
Actually, you
Slow.
read the Savage Gene in during COVID.
Really? Yeah,
Yes.
same.
Yes.
Same.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Like it's that book is so profound that we don't speak about it. But actually, that book kind of gave me an impetus or an urge
Hmm.
to start, because what happened is, let me just go through what led me to write the book, and then we can go back to Selfish
Yeah.
Gene. uh, I read many books, and as I was reading the books, I was always taking a summary. Uh,
Hmm.
you know, just an exercise to kind of. And I always encourage people to do this,
Yeah.
because acquiring knowledge and understanding the knowledge are two different things. I notice many of us, even I notice it at my work, we all have the knowledge in our minds, but we don't truly embody the knowledge. And
Yeah.
when you read these books, Thinking Fast and Slow, everyone kind of raves about how this book is paramount. It's mind shift. It causes mind shift in your thinking,
Yeah.
and but we know the facts that are portrayed in the book, but when it comes for us to apply the knowledge
Hmm.
in a way that yields us better results in our life, we kind of like stop there. It's like I know that, but then the application of it is different.
Yeah,
And I always notice, if you try to explain it, if you try to explain the knowledge, or if you try to write it down afterwards, it helps ingrain, like, let's say, the knowledge
that's
further
true.
in, like
That's true.
maybe weave it into your behavior.
Yeah.
So I was taking these notes, and yeah, thinking fast and slow. There was the Selfish Gene, all of Malcolm Gladwell book. I love this author.
Okay.
He's a
Never
journalist,
read
Malcolm
anything.
Gladwell.
Yeah, for him.
Yeah, he had a book called Blink.
Yeah.
Also, it's really interesting how experts, they have this intuition that comes up, this intuitive, like, understanding of what's happening,
Hmm.
that happens in an instance, and what leads to it, and
Okay.
how this intuition can also be misleading.
Okay.
So it's also, I mentioned also that book,
Yeah.
and my learning from
Yeah.
it also
Yeah.
in fantasy worlds. So that was a very interesting book, and also he has many other books, which is like How to Talk to Strangers. Anyways, so I was reading all of these books, taking notes, and I realized after reading about 10 books that I have some sort of a red line going through all of them. Like
Yeah.
there is a common narrative.
Yeah.
And I was counting the words. I had about 25,000 words, and we were in the middle of the COVID lockdown.
Those are the summaries that you were doing from
Yes,
the books. They
exactly.
total to 25,000.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
That's a lot of words.
Yeah, so it was exactly a lot of
Yeah.
words. And then I was like, you know what? It was just a pipe dream. I said, let me continue adding
Hmm.
flesh to the
Hmm.
bones, and maybe one day I will publish. I had no idea what I was getting into.
It's interesting that you're saying that because when I was reading the book, I realized that it is a lot of
Yes,
things that are not necessarily the same thing, but at
yes,
the same time they kind of flow. And
yeah,
now that you mentioned that you had summaries and interpretations of each book, and then you had ideas, main ideas, and then you kind of weaved everything all together. That it makes sense.
yes,
That's
exactly.
pretty
So
nice.
the main comment I always receive from anyone who read the book so far is that you are all over the place,
Yeah.
but I like how you wove it together.
Yeah.
Which is, I think this was my biggest challenge, because maybe we're going to get into this later in our discussion, but maybe I want to touch base on it now. I don't like about this world this extreme specialization.
Hmm.
Um, Back in the day, the term philosopher used to encompass
Hmm.
a scientific method of
Yeah.
understanding the world.
Yeah.
So, like things like physics, or psychology, or even like scientific inquiry,
Yeah. Math.
or math,
Yeah. Yeah.
even
Yeah.
that was part of like a
Yeah.
philosophical
Logic.
thinking,
It's a big part
logic.
of logic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was all a big part of philosophical inquiry.
Okay.
Nowadays, I don't know what happened. And also, this is also something that we have forgotten about, and that was the fact of philosophy wasn't also just concerned about the tangible, the things that you can quantify. It was also about the qualitative aspect of life,
Yeah. Exactly. Of
right?
course.
And the qualitative aspect of life can only be understood, or let's say absorbed completely, is once you look at all of the components, like,
Yeah.
which, like, it gives an emergent understanding.
Yeah.
Once you understand multiple different topics, there is an emergent understanding of combining them together.
Hmm.
But now, with our, let's say, technocratic
Hmm.
view of the world, I think we became lost in the details, like we're missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
So everyone is like specialized in one. So I want to write a book, I want to write about one single topic,
Okay.
right? uh, I didn't want to. I didn't want to do that take.
Yeah.
I could have specialized in one area, but I wanted to offer views that could be compatible from different, uh, let's say, areas or disciplines,
Hmm.
that could potentially like create a narrative that is appealing and understanding to the reader.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I move to my questions, I want to ask you one more thing. Um, what do you do for work? Like
Yeah.
what is your
Oh,
background?
yeah. So I studied computer science,
Okay. Okay.
and I started my career journey as a full stack developer, which is a front end, back end, and like APIs and interfaces with Microsoft SQL. So I worked for 8 years
Hmm.
in that journey. And funny enough, people ask, how do you come from IT background
Yeah.
and what makes you think about philosophy? But it's funny because while you study IT, there's, for example, something in object oriented programming It's very much related to concepts of philosophy.
Okay.
Like
Such as.
you have to understand like how inheritance work in conceptual. Like for example, when you are building a class, you can build a class called vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
and vehicle has certain attributes. Vehicle moves from place A to place B,
Okay.
and now you can build another class that inherits the vehicle class, class car.
Okay.
Class car inherits the its properties and functions from the vehicle class,
And has different
and
functions.
has different
Ah,
functions
okay.
exactly. So this
Okay.
is like a core.
Stacking,
Exactly, you
stacking
stack
the
concepts
functions.
on top of one another, and then like there's encapsulation. You call function in a different class, and then like there is a lot of philosophical thinking. If
Yeah.
you want to actually dissect a problem,
Yeah.
there is a problem that you're trying, like, oh, we have a complicated shipping charging based on regions and items that are in your basket. You have to think logically and rationally about it, which is like you the same, let's say, scientific method that you use while
Yeah.
you're philosophically thinking about
Yeah.
any topic in life. So there is a very common parallel that people don't talk about because they think that you are only focused on coding,
Mm-hmm.
but when you understand coding, you understand that it actually takes a lot
Yeah.
from this
Yeah,
philosophical way of
yeah,
thinking.
and this is some misunderstanding. Also, philosophy is intertwined in everything. So if you are familiar with the big questions that are being that we face on a daily basis, if you thought about these things, and then you have to look for the answers, where would you look for answers? Usually, you look for answers with religion.
Correct.
What is truth? What
Yes.
is good?
Yeah.
What is honor?
Yeah.
So philosophy provides some framework for these things,
Yes.
and I like it that you also have you go through philosophical ideas, evolutionary biology,
Yes.
psychology. So we're gonna get to all these things.
Yeah.
Now, while I was reading the book, I kind of wrote down some questions that will help us first understand more about the whole
Peel the layers.
yes,
Yeah.
the whole
Yeah.
feel of the book,
Yeah.
and specifically about some chapters and some things that I liked and some things that I thought I want to understand a little bit more,
Yeah.
so I will push back.
Of course.
And
I love it. Yeah.
yeah, so first question that I thought that might be appropriate here is to tell us what inspired you to write fantasy worlds, and I wonder why worlds, which is in plural,
Yeah. Yeah.
and how does the book reflect the personal journey and understanding perception and reality? So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that aspect of what inspired you
Yeah.
and how does it reflect a reality.
Yeah. So I think number one, I think we're just organically as individuals just drawn to certain questions. I
Hmm.
think you're born with certain interests, and you have a certain curiosity to some certain topics. The topic of how we perceive the world, which I think it was brought into my mind by my life experiences. We growing up in different countries, as I mentioned, and also the incidents that happened with my workout partner are also in my life. It just became a thing that I became more tuned to.
Hmm.
Why do we perceive the world differently?
Okay.
Uh, why did I think about it in a sense of fantasy worlds? I didn't call it fantasy world because I believe we are all living in our own subjective reality, and our
Hmm.
subjective realities are sometimes not completely aligned with each other, and also not completely aligned with the objective reality.
Yes.
So I mentioned it fantasy worlds because it even goes deeper than that. That even within you, you could have multiple fantasy
Okay.
worlds, which
So
you
you
are not.
weave
Yes,
multiple
yes,
lives. You live
yes,
multiple lives
exactly,
also.
exactly. So you can move between them, and they're also influencing your behavior and action
Hmm.
in ways that you do not, like, let's say, consciously perceive.
Yeah.
But like there is the whole topic of between your conscious and subconscious, and I believe the fantasy worlds topic
Hmm.
is a lot about what happens in your subconscious before you knowing,
Okay.
like underneath, like let's say
So
the hood
before
of
you
your
make a
awareness.
decision,
Yes,
what's leading to this
yes, yes,
decision?
exactly,
The
exactly.
influences
Yes,
that's going. Yeah.
and there is a myriad, like a whole plethora of
Yeah.
influences coming from all sorts of perspective, which is what led me to kind of research on all of these different disciplines, because
Hmm.
I'm like, you cannot just come at it from one perspective,
Hmm.
because as you mentioned like earlier, I had to go into evolutionary biology. I have to understand how evolution works.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of research, Darwinian theory of evolution, sexual selection versus natural selection, and what are all of these pressures and forces from the environment? How do they select on the mutation that is happening in us,
Hmm.
and how these selective pressures are not only just happening on a DNA or gene level, they're also happening on our uh, emotional,
Yeah.
cultural
Ideas.
ideas. They're also applying similarly
Yeah.
to our, let's say, intangible parts
Yeah.
of our
What Richard
lives.
Dawkins calls memes.
Meme,
Exactly,
exactly,
which is
exactly.
very
So that
interesting.
was
Yeah.
that was one of the greatest finding, which I kind of extracted from the selfish gene, is
Hmm.
the idea of a meme,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which is the cultural analog of a gene.
Yeah.
So gene is how all species transmit information. For
Uh huh.
example, birds, they're born with an innate ability to build nests.
Okay.
They don't have to learn it. They're just born because the information is coded in the DNA
It's
and it's
ingrained
passed.
in the
It's passed, yeah.
DNA. Yeah. Throughout the
Or they're born
years,
after like day or two. They start like fluttering their wings, and yeah,
instinctively they go and
instinctively they
they
know.
start to know how to do it.
And humans, on the other hand, many of the things that we have to acquire, they don't come from the gene, they come from the meme, which is
Yeah.
the cultural analog of
Uh huh.
gene, which is like the selective pressures that we get from our culture, which is what we gain through language, observing people, imitation,
Yeah.
and all of the cultural aspects that makes us who we are. So that was like an extremely interesting phenomenon, which is like, which kind of like directly aligns with what I was trying to explore of our perceptions or our fantasy worlds are directly influenced by what they call also in sociology, um, structure versus agency, right?
Okay.
Is your structure versus agency? Are you independently, individually in charge of your own life and your
Hmm.
behavior and
Hmm.
how you perform, or
Hmm.
is your structure, your environment responsible for it? And the debate is still ongoing. Like
Yeah.
no one knows what sways or what has a higher say or a stronger say on what you will do next,
Yeah.
right?
Khaled, what I hear from you is a lot of reflection, a lot of deep thought, and I cannot help but wonder that reflection is a luxury in a way. And that
Correct.
kind of deep reflection,
Correct.
not
Yeah.
it's not that everyone wakes up in the morning and start thinking what kind of influence might happen today that will make my decisions throughout that day. Just people go through their lives without reflecting that deeply. Uh,
You're right,
what?
actually.
How can this book, for example, help others at least be a bit more aware of the importance of reflecting on what influences they might get from the outside world and from the inside
Yeah.
world?
So I mean, the book touches also on this question, maybe indirectly, but what you said is actually very true because we are privileged to
Hmm.
have, let's say, the space, the mental space, and the actual space
Yeah.
in our lives, and the exposure. Because living in a Western world, where let's say freedom of speech and the share of ideas is quite encouraged.
Yes.
So you are more like, even through scrolling in social media, or if you're on YouTube or on TV, you're always somehow bombarded with different views and takes on life.
Yeah.
So it allows you to form your own thinking on them. And I feel bad. Um, there are certain regions or parts of the world where, first of all, you're not exposed to that, or
Yeah.
you don't even have the luxury, as you mentioned it, to even have the space to think about these things. But in a way, also, in another way, if you think about it, I noticed that people in, whenever you travel to a poor country, which you think like people from affluent countries, they always travel like to Thailand, they always travel to Mexico, or these countries that we don't deem like a developed country. Even though they don't have the time and space to think about these things, I feel like a lot of them are instinctively living it because they don't have the time to think about it, so they have to act it. So
Yeah.
you're thinking about their views on the cultural ties, the networking, living together, the kindness aspect that we tend to think of
Mm.
in isolation.
Mm.
They are living it in
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like indirectly they're living it, but
Hmm.
they're not thinking it
Hmm.
somehow, because that's the only way you could do to survive, right?
Yeah, Khaled,
Yeah.
I'm happy that your deep reflection and your thoughts about what's influencing your life led you not to a midlife crisis, but
Yeah.
but to
Yes.
write,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you channeled it to write a nice
Exactly.
book
Exactly.
like this one.
Exactly.
So I'm
Exactly.
happy this happened.
Yeah.
And let's move because I have a lot
A
of
lot of
questions.
questions.
So
Yeah. Let's
let's
go
try
through
to
them. Yeah.
cover everything because there's a lot of interesting things
Yeah. And I think
that I
even Benji is interested too.
isn't Benji is interested from this conversation. So my next point is about emotions and rationality. You explore the idea that our emotions and rationality can distort reality. Can you share an example from your own life where this became evident? How emotions and rationality both distort reality?
Yes. Yeah, I think I could spend half an hour just speaking about this topic, but I'll go through it quickly. So first of all, let's separate it. Our emotions, unfortunately, because we're living an isolated life in the Western world, and I noticed it like whether it's in Canada, Germany, Amsterdam, and I lived in the Western world for a long time, where I could sense that we're stuck in our own thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever thoughts or let's say emotional framework that you inherited from your parents and culture, you tend to favor them, and that's not a flaw. That's a way of how humans evolved.
Yeah,
Like, right, we
you're
uh,
not born in a vacuum, so you're
exactly,
born somewhere.
exactly. We're
Yeah.
born somewhere. We absorb the way of feeling,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, in a certain way, and we even though we're living in an isolated way of life, but our life is impacted by global forces and things like that.
Of
Like
course.
the world is interconnected now
Yeah.
more than we'd like to admit, and many things that are happening across the world, like war in the Middle East and Ukraine and different conflicts in the world, are somehow lingering in your mind. Like I sometimes wake up feeling agitated or bothered, and I'm not realizing I've been watching the news
Yeah.
the previous few days, and it's just keeping me awake.
Yeah.
We're just wired to think about these things.
So
Now,
this is from the side of the emotions that is
yeah,
distorting value, or rationality. This is, I think, emotions because you're
so they apply to both because let's say if you want to speak about evolutionary biology or how humans are structured to act, we acquire a certain pattern of thinking or a
yeah.
certain pattern of emotion, and that pattern becomes reductionist. So unfortunately, we're not a CPU that can process things so quick all the time.
Yet
Not yet,
we're
not
not
yet.
yet. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, maybe at one point. Let's see if Neuralink
Yeah.
gets that done. You have no idea, but not yet. So what happens through your development when you're a child? You gather a lot from the world, and mainly from the people, your
Yeah.
parents, your community, if you have one. Sadly, many people do not have one nowadays. Your culture, how things are acted, and also how you intuitively react to things.
Hmm.
And I came up with this concept in the book called emotional algorithm, which is like you look at when we're growing up, we look at our repository,
Hmm.
and we see, is the event I'm facing right now, do I have a matching feeling or something similar to it?
Okay.
Do I need to react to it
Or
right
like
away?
heuristics in a way, like rule of thumb.
Heuristics, exactly.
Yeah.
And this heuristics applies to emotions and intellect,
Hmm.
though even though we do not see it, but as I mentioned before, in our subconscious, it operates and it sways us big time.
Hmm.
So at the beginning, you're trying to map how you react to whatever is happening in the world.
Yeah.
If you see, when you're a child, if you smell something nice or if you taste something nice, you're wiring, let's say, your neurological let's say framework to react to anything similar to it in a similar way. Yes, I want to eat it.
Uh huh.
If you see something that is warm, you touched it once and it kind of burnt you, that gives you like, okay, do not go there again, do
Hmm.
not do it again. And the brain, every time it encounters the same event, it doesn't recalculate it. It just, as you mentioned, heuristics. By heuristics, it
Just like
goes
shortcut.
shortcut.
Yeah.
And the reason that happened is we evolved in the savannah,
Hmm.
where immediate and instant reaction is required. You
Hmm.
cannot process every moment. Even 2 or 3 seconds can
Yeah.
be too late.
Life or death.
Yeah,
Yeah.
can be
Exactly.
life or death. So imagine if there is a threat, if you're hearing, like, let's say the bushes are rustling and you're in the savannah, you do not have time to look and say, is this a lion, or is this just the wind,
Just do it.
or is this
Exactly.
just a monkey that
You
is
have to act.
harmless? You have to always act. So
Yeah.
maybe the instinctive reaction of assuming the worst is baked into our DNA. And I it's not that I came up with that terminology. I refer to it called negativity bias that
Hmm.
we have in us. And negativity bias, people think that it's something that you can get rid of. I do not think it's something you can get rid of, because I believe it's just an intrinsic part of who we are, not
Hmm.
just as a human being, but as a living species. Because
Okay.
for life to work, this is where I diverge into multiple different
Uh
topics.
huh.
Life is the only thing that we know that goes against entropy. Entropy is the second law of thermodynamics, which states that every system tends to go towards disorder,
Hmm.
because which is the energy in a contained system has to be dispersed and has to be equal in all across the system.
And how do you? What do you mean by life is against entropy?
Yeah, because the formation of life requires a concentration of order. Your cellular interactions, all the different systems that you have, there has to be a specific kind of order. You know what they call the Goldilocks zone in our
Yeah.
environment, for example. You need to have the perfect temperature. You need to eat at a certain time. You need
Hmm.
to continue breathing. So there is a full symbiotic uh, systems that
Hmm.
are working in concert together all the time to fight this disorder. And actually, aging
Hmm.
is entropy taking effect on us.
Yeah.
So when we age, you know,
So
this.
by life, you mean the start of life is against entropy,
Yes,
but once you're born, you just follow. You just
yes, exactly.
going towards.
So, and I believe somewhere deep in our subconscious,
Hmm.
there is a lurking awareness of entropy in our life. We're not aware of
Yeah.
it, but we're operating because we understand how many things need to happen. You
Yeah.
know, if I fall now, I could break my leg. I need to be always balanced. I need to eat at a certain time. There could be threat coming from my people, my humanity. There
Hmm.
could be threat coming from other
Hmm.
species. Oh, it could rain. It could freeze now. I could be cold. Like, you know, there are multiple parameters that have to be within like a certain range for us to live optimally.
Okay.
So I believe this lurking awareness from, let's say, if we call entropy, that entropy is always yielding a force in our life, which is our order, this intense order that is required for us to live optimally, is always under, let's say, review and threat, and like, you know, this could not happen, which what leads to us aging and eventually, you
Yeah.
know, passing
Yeah. I
away.
mean, we try to put things in order, at least in our brains, and just categorize things, how
Yeah,
things should work, how things should not work.
yeah,
But we're constantly faced with life, and
yes,
life is not in our control. So
yes.
we always have to adapt, change, figure out new things. But that's very interesting. But when I was reading it, and I was wondering that if if I want to understand reality, okay, and if I cannot trust my emotions, if I cannot trust my rationality,
Let me get to that.
ha-
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. So the reason I brought the negativity bias and the effect of entropy, like, let's say, on our subconscious, I was trying to, let's say, pave the path for us to understand that our emotions, first of all, are inherently reductionist,
Hmm.
are inherently also just driven by heuristics.
Yeah.
And the same model of thinking applies to our intellect.
Hmm.
We sometimes tend to categorize things.
Hmm.
They always notice, even in research, the further or the more expert you are in a topic, that could give you a lot of blind spots
Yeah.
to different aspects
Yeah.
of it. Like, it's actually known even in academic research.
Okay.
So they always try to bring a fresh perspective or new grads just to add different views, which
Hmm.
is they're not, and that's in the book Blink.
Hmm.
Actually, Malcolm Gladwell, I extracted that. He went deeply into analyzing how it works, and I realized that, okay, so maybe, and also, like, just to go back maybe to a more a simpler way of understanding it, we all know what hangry means. Not
Yes.
angry, hangry.
Yeah.
Hangry is when you're angry, you get angry when you're hungry,
Yeah.
right? And
We all know that.
we all have. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
most salient emotion
Hmm.
that could probably exemplify what I'm trying to talk about, which is, if you're aware of it, if you're aware that you haven't eaten or you're hungry, you start to not have a full trust in this anger. Ideally,
Yes.
not unfortunately, not many people do that,
Yeah.
right? And in Thinking Fast and Slow, I remember there was a amazing research. I still remember it until now. First time I read it, I remember it until now. he was doing a research with judges, Daniel Kahneman
Yeah.
in Israel, I think it was, and he said he noticed that these judges of parole, so trying to give people like an early leave
Yeah.
from prison, he noticed that the judges were giving the harsher sentences right before lunch,
Lunch break.
and then after lunch, after they eat, they give like a more
Softer
softer
sentences.
sentences,
Yes, yes.
which is like this research should have sent shockwaves into our lives, like
Yeah.
how we operate. But
Yeah.
all of us took that knowledge. I'm like, that is really interesting.
Yeah.
And then I go yelling at my friend when I'm hungry, like, why don't I? If the awareness of this influence on me is in my mind, why am I? Why aren't I embodying that? This is my main, maybe. Uh,
That's from the emotional part. So you cannot
yes,
trust your
emotion.
hunger
Exactly.
because you're driven by your hunger. Your body needs food, is in a state of fighting because you want to find food
100%.
right now.
Yes.
So you're in a bad mood, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But okay, this I understand. But when it comes to rationality,
Yeah.
where's the catch there? Like,
Yeah.
how am I not supposed to trust my
Yeah.
trust reason and the
Yeah.
way I
Yeah.
reason?
So funny enough, so I think you can apply the same logic of emotions into our anxiety, which I believe anxiety. I expanded a lot on the topic of anxiety in the book, and anxiety is always seen in our common modern world as, let's say, a pathology, as something that we need to heal from,
Yeah,
something that you need to overcome.
yeah.
And I really dislike this view on anxiety because no one looks at anxiety as an intrinsic or a very crucial part of who
Hmm.
we are as human beings. Like it's something that we should embrace and dance with, because I feel anxiety or all sorts of different emotions,
So many.
whether it's fear, whether it's anger,
Yeah.
whether it's hunger, whether it's sadness. Emotions are not there for us to sit there and ponder on or upon them, right?
Act on them.
Yes.
Okay.
I, I believe emotions are signals, they're a call to action.
Hmm.
And the reason you're feeling it is because it's encouraging you to act. And I'm not saying you always have to act in a certain way, but you need to act.
Okay.
But if you want to reduce it, I
Yeah.
believe anytime you're facing a thought that is, let's say, enslaving your mind, like you cannot exit from it,
Uh huh.
like even doing a certain action, like I always say, just go for a walk, go
Yeah.
for a run, go for a bike ride, go do a certain activity, and you're noticing that the intensity of the emotion is starting to deteriorate. It's no longer that a thing that I cannot deal with anymore.
Hmm.
So, but moving on from emotions and how they're misleading, we come to the thinking of our intellectual faculties. And when I started the, let's say, exploration of the intellect chapter,
Yes.
I mentioned this at the beginning. Many of the readers probably think I understand how emotions can influence my behavior and can lead me towards, let's say, a suboptimal path. But I believe I'm a rational agent and I can overcome or supersede the flaws of my emotional algorithm.
Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, you can do it, but you can do it if you consciously went through the exercise of and the journey
Yeah.
of let's
If
say,
you're stoic,
yes,
you
yeah,
can
yeah, yeah,
really just stand there and look at your emotions without being in bed with your emotions.
exactly,
But
exactly, yeah.
how real is that, and how doable is
Yes.
that?
So I believe until you point your attention to it, either by reading a book, Stoicism,
Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius, or either by going through experiences, or either by seeing it acted upon by the people around you, then you can start like maybe deriving the same way of behavior from your surrounding. But naturally, we are not, because we're left alone a lot with our thoughts, with our own faculties. So a
Mhm.
lot of times it tends to causes it does cause errors without us understanding that it causes error. But let me try to explain to you why our intellect is driven by our emotional forces, because we tend to think that our intellectual faculties and emotional faculties are separate in our brain.
Okay.
But what we don't understand is, through our evolution, again, going into evolutionary biology, the prefrontal cortex, which is where our reason, logic, language centers are like, let's say, existing, they're built on top of the primal, let's say, more basic emotional system that is existing within us. Let's say the amygdala and uh, I'm not. I studied a lot about neuroscience, but I'm not an expert in it.
Yeah.
But this is my
Okay.
conclusion from it: is
Okay.
that our, let's say, intellectual faculties are built on top of the emotional and primal systems that
Okay.
exist within us, which is where our anxiety, our emotions are starting. Which is why you see most of the animals in the world are driven by the primal instincts.
Hmm.
Territoriality, food, threat. These things have more of a grip on us than our reason and logic, because our reason and
Okay.
logic are built on top of them.
Okay.
And David Hume, which is a very popular also philosopher, I read this quote, which is a very popular quote from his narrative or his way of thinking, which I never paid much attention to until I was starting to read the book. He said, reason is and ought to be the slaves of the passions.
Yeah.
Reason is and ought to be the slave of the
Hmm.
passions. And I was like, what does it mean?
Hmm.
Like, is our reason a slave to our passion?
Hmm.
And then you notice it. Um, you're like, I thought that reason is independent of it, and then I
Yeah.
realized even in my life, I come up to conclusions that are always driven by how I feel about it. Which is, I think, if you remember some topics from Thinking Fast and Slow,
Hmm.
which is, I think what he called it is substitution bias, which is when you're confronted with a question or a choice that requires you to make a rational, let's say, choice on it. Like, you have to come up with a rational view on it
Okay.
to come up with a conclusion. I believe he said that we substitute it with how we feel about it. So, for example, he mentioned in the book, I remember it. Uh, do you like Ford stocks? Do you want to buy the Ford stock
Yeah.
on the stock exchange? Instead of going and checking the balance sheet and EBT, TDA, all of
Yeah.
this financial terminology, and understanding how it works, and understanding, let's say, how the economics of the car industry works, you start like substituting it. Do I like the Ford
How it looks.
car company? Which, if you look at it right now, Tesla, I was always baffled and shocked
Yeah.
how it has the market value that it was having, while the current sales and the future projection of it was never ever giving the rational, let's say, projection to where it's the price.
Yeah.
It was priced here, but if you look at all the data, it should be priced here.
Uh-huh.
That doesn't apply to just Tesla, it applies to many other companies.
Hmm.
But you're seeing how emotions are driving what we call our rational decisions.
Okay.
And if you look at how countries operate
Hmm.
on a macro level, leaders, you're like, these are countries that champion uh, logic,
Yeah.
champion
Yeah.
rationality,
I don't think
champion
there's
scientific finding.
few countries and leaders that yeah, prioritize logic and
I actually don't even know
yeah,
anyone
yeah,
nowadays.
yeah.
I
Everyone is
always,
working on
I mean,
emotions.
yes, I always tell you, give me one public figure. I mean, there are really public speakers or public figures nowadays that we look up to.
Hmm.
Like, you can think of Sam Harris, even though I don't agree with him much anymore. But he tries to champion logic a lot in his dialogue.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, but even then, the more you dive into their narrative, you
Yeah,
notice that they're even recently, even Sam Harris, his influence, like his logic, is influenced a lot by his emotions and upbringing. He's
yeah.
not just purely rational.
Yeah, of course, of course. I agree with you 100% that emotions, you cannot just turn off the switch on emotions and become this enlightened, rational being. That's
Exactly.
not possible. How I'd like to see it is, you know the analogy of the elephant and the rider. So the rider is able to direct the elephant to make that elephant walk into a specific path or go to a specific point. But
Correct.
once this elephant decides that I'm not listening to my rider, there is no way that the rider can still control the elephant.
Exactly.
And here, the elephant is
Is
the
the emotion.
emotions, and the rider is the logic.
Oh, that's a
So
good
I think,
analogy,
so
actually.
I think that sums up how in a funny way how that you can direct your emotions until you can't.
Until you
And
can't.
once you can't,
Exactly.
that's it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Khalid, great man. Let's move to the part where you talk, when you weave in all three frameworks: philosophy, biology, and psychology. Because I thought that when I was reading it, it's great. It's a lot of information, So, how do concepts from philosophy, psychology, and evolutionary biology intersect to shape our perception of the world? So, how these three different things
Yeah,
all work together or all influence
yeah,
and
yeah.
input and shape our reality? How, give me a summary on how all these three
Mm.
work together in fantasy
Yes,
worlds,
in
especially.
fantasy worlds, yeah. Because you're also right, because in our current modern view on these disciplines, they somehow contradict each other.
Yeah.
And I don't, maybe I'm more reminiscent of a life I didn't live.
Hmm.
Maybe I mentioned it earlier in our conversation. The way I understood philosophy back in the day, in the era of enlightenment, scientific revolution, there was more of a holistic understanding about all the different disciplines that are impacting us as
Yeah.
individuals, as species. We were, of course, flawed in them. There was a lot of wrong assumptions. There was a lot of we didn't even have the tools or utilities to even have this crisp, clear understanding of the world that we have now.
Uh huh.
But there was a lot more when people were engaged in a certain discipline. They had more of a holistic understanding of everything that surrounds it, and that applies to the quantitative and qualitative
Hmm.
uh, parts of living.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, if you started to look at each area, which is like most of the books that you buy
Yeah.
nowadays, or most of the things that we have, everything is hyper specialized.
Hmm.
And in hyper specialization, as I mentioned earlier, we tend to lose the forest for the trees. So you're always looking at the tree and you're understanding that it's part of a bigger forest. So maybe if I want to understand what's happening to the tree, I need
Yeah.
to understand what's influencing the forest in general. So uh, that's part of my thinking in general. I think as an individual, I was always trying to find out, and that's even like trying to fix a problem at work or in coding.
Yeah.
Like, what are other things beyond this problem that could be influencing it?
Okay.
And that's why they always say, if you have a problem, sleep on it. Sleep on it, because you're allowing, when you're thinking uh, in a hyperactive way about a certain issue, you might be locked in the boundaries of your certain thoughts without understanding that there could be different ways of looking at it.
Okay.
I love the
Ah,
saying
yeah.
from Einstein. I think it was Einstein who said this: you cannot solve a problem
Yeah.
with the same level of thinking that you used when you
Yeah.
discovered it.
Yeah.
I
Same tools also that you
Yes,
use for
yeah, you cannot, which I completely believe in it. So I realize we have a problem, and I realize that the answer might not lie in
one
one
discipline.
area. So
Yeah.
I realized that I had to
Yeah.
dive into different disciplines
Hmm.
to extract, like, let's say, which I really found, like,
Hmm.
there. Let me just go back a little bit. There is an American author, I forgot his name. He said a good story uh, cannot be devised; it must be distilled.
Hmm.
Which is what he meant is, many authors, they understand the basic structure, the blueprint of the book.
Hmm.
They put the pillars, and then they start adding flesh to the bones.
Hmm.
I didn't do it this way. I went more of an exploratory journey. So I started with, like, okay, I want to understand why our perceptions are misleading us,
Hmm.
how we live in our own fantasy world. So I need to go back. I need to go back. Maybe let's start with our evolution.
Yeah.
What? How do we acquire information? What is perception? I
Hmm.
started with that, and then I started growing into, okay, evolutionary biology. What is misleading us in there? Okay, there's, as we're evolving, also there are other factors. Like, there
Yes.
could be topics from physics, there could
Hmm.
be topic from philosophy, there could be topics from our neuroscience. So I tried to learn, like, okay, there is many factors, and a lot of times I noticed that all of these factors coalesce to make you feel in a certain way. So looking at it from a certain angle doesn't give you the full answer,
Yeah.
but it could give you an answer.
You need that zoomed out view,
Exactly.
and you need that zoomed out view to be also informed in a way that you understand some philosophy, you
Yeah.
understand some psychology, you understand some biology, even though philosophy, for example, is searching for meaning, is searching for truth, and biology is just saying that of course in a reductionist way, that we are just apes,
Yes.
hairless apes,
Yes.
and then psychology is somewhere in between.
Yes.
So
Correct.
there's some science, but also there's a lot of
Yeah.
things that are not solid
Yeah.
scientific, like biology.
Yeah.
But also it kind of connects biology and psychology, so philosophy. So I really liked it.
Yeah.
And uh, Yeah, so I really like the fact that you are going through all these things, and I like the fact, but I wonder, for example, isn't it dangerous to have bits of philosophy? And we see that more often now. You see people, genetic supremacists, for example,
Yeah.
they can use some philosophy to justify what they're saying, and they can use some psychology. So you see people nitpicking things from philosophy, from physics, to make them fit in their worldview. And my worry was, is it is there a chance that by picking all these three very huge, immense frameworks and trying to patch
Mm.
something up, might you end with some kind of a Frankensteinian worldview? In a way that,
No, no, no. I get your point, and that's why, to be honest with you, this was a concern of mine. Is w- you're bringing all of these different disciplines, different areas of knowledge together.
yeah.
But I really tried my best, and I hope that the readers also felt it. That I tried to ground it in really a lot of
Hmm.
scientific research. It wasn't just randomly bringing up different topics, but to your point, I believe it doesn't matter what you're doing. Even the smartest people in the world, the most powerful people in the world, they always use these. I don't know why philosophy is seen as a it's undermined. Like it's not given its full value. It's always seen as a something under our rational
Yeah,
thinking. But I,
like
I believe
someone's
it govern. Yeah,
philosophizing
yeah,
this
yeah.
guy.
But I think this is where we veered off,
Hmm.
because this is maybe something I reached out at the conclusion of the book is we're obsessed with quantitative measurements and results
Okay.
in driving our thinking and ways of living, and obviously it has a powerful and very very effective, let's say, results on our life.
Hmm.
Like it's not that this is a stupid way of doing things, but the problem that we had is while we became obsessed with quantification so much that we forgot the qualitative
Yeah.
aspect of life,
Yeah.
that now everything qualitative is always trying to be translated into quantitative. And you read these articles online. How much does a love translate to your a yearly income? If you
Yeah.
make 100,000, whatever, six figures a year,
Yeah.
it's equivalent to having a relation. Or if you're making this much money
Yes.
a year,
Yes. Yes.
or
Yes.
they're
Yeah,
also
we're
like
obsessed with metrics
we're
and
obsessed
numbers,
numbers.
and also you can see that translating into health and food and everything.
Yeah, because
So yeah.
let me give you just one example, just to your point, and just to show how it can be misleading. So now let's say science could continue evolving, we could continue integrating with AI, nanobiology, to figure out how we could eliminate heart disease, or build like I'm just saying, for example, I don't know if anyone is working on it.
Yeah.
Like let's say I build a synthetic heart that we could replace your heart if your
Yeah.
heart is
Once done,
failing.
you replace it. You
Yeah,
continue.
yes. And we could spend like millions and millions and millions of dollars
Yeah.
just trying to figure this out. And the chance of succeeding, like let's say with our current medical technological advancement that we have, the chance of succeeding in like replacing your heart arteries and doing stuff like that is probably equivalent to telling people, if you start living a healthier life, if you start, like let's say, just being a bit more active, if you start like paying more attention to what you eat, to your stress levels, these things are much cheaper, but they're not quantitative. You can't
Yes.
quantify, but
Yeah.
they could yield a better result.
Yeah.
And there is a story from the Cold War era, which it got stuck with me. I don't know if the story is correct or not. They say online that it's a fictitious story. Nevertheless, I believe the gist of the story is still very,
Yeah.
very, very,
Important.
very
Valuable.
important. Very important. That
Yeah.
it's worth talking about. They say during the Cold War, NASA spent like thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to try to invent a pen with ink that can work in space without gravity, because ink requires
Yeah.
gravity for
Yeah.
it to be like, while you're writing, to be stuck on paper.
Yeah.
And what Americans failed to do is they said that the Soviet Union at the time, they said, I'm just going to use a pencil.
I was just thinking about it.
Yeah.
I've never heard this story. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
like,
If you look it
why
up,
don't you use a pencil?
if you look it up, they said,
Yeah.
why spend all of this money on technology if
Yeah,
we can just use it.
sounds a fishy story.
Yeah. So my point was, and this is where I reached out in in the book, I came up with that conclusion. I mentioned to hammer everything else is a nail
Yeah,
to an intelligent species
yeah.
like us that can look at all of these models,
Mm-hmm.
combine them,
Mm-hmm.
analyze them, dissect
Mm-hmm.
them, uh, figure out what's happening behind them.
Yeah,
We tend to overcomplicate
yeah.
also rather simple views on our problems, issues, and lives,
Mm-hmm.
which I felt is not doing us justice because I love also the English saying simplicity is the ultimate sophistication,
Yeah,
which I also mentioned in the book,
yeah,
which was sometimes the most beautiful, like if you go to an unkept park or garden,
yeah.
garden is a kept version, you're just noticing like, it just
Just to
flows,
the
just
jungle.
exists. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
just
just like a
exists.
jungle. Yeah,
And there is a natural beauty in
yeah.
there beyond what we could do with
Mm.
our complexity and trying to analyze and doing all of this. I tried to do that maybe in my research a
Yeah,
lot. Is first of all is not getting lost in the detail and trying to see holistically how, because whether we like it or not, we do employ philosophy even in how we communicate. You look at politicians, storytelling aspect, these are all philosophical, psychological aspects. And if you look at also marketing companies, retail companies that are big nowadays, they're hijacking these flaws in our systems
mm-hmm.
all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned that he called also in Thinking Fast and Slow, I think Daniel Kahneman called it the framing effect. How you frame an issue
Yeah,
would be detrimental in whether it succeeds or not, right?
yeah,
Or very catalyst
yeah,
in doing it. So if you say something is 95% fat free,
yeah,
it's better than saying it contains 5% fat, and
yeah.
people will buy it more. So that
Reminds
only shows you that we're driven by these.
Yeah,
We're
it
driven.
reminds me of the
Uh,
story that you told in your book about the king that summons one of
yes,
his councils
yes,
and asks them to predict their future, and one of them comes and says that you're gonna lose all your loved ones
yes,
one by one after the other. So the
yes.
king was super angry, and he sentenced him to life in prison
Prison.
or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
And then he summoned another guy,
Interpreter
wise person, and then the other wise person and told him that, good news, your Majesty, you're gonna outlive
of your family members.
all your family
Yeah,
members. And then the gist of the story is that both of them told the same story, but they said it
they
in
framed it
different
differently.
frame.
Yeah,
So what you were saying, that's
yeah.
really interesting, and I think now with technological advancement, biotechnology, and all the wearables and the counting that we're doing now, it's really nice, it's really important, but it doesn't answer by quantifying everything. You cannot have a good quality of life. So you need
Exactly.
to have
Yeah,
cherish both, and you need to look for both, not just longevity, for example, in health and fitness and wellness, is not about how many years. So it's not about your lifespan, but it's about your health span. So it's
correct.
about how healthy and the quality of your life.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
great. Khaled, I
100%.
want to move on to
Yeah,
a different question
let's
because
go.
I have a lot.
Yeah, there is
So
quite a
let's
few.
try to cover
Yeah.
as much as possible. So this is question about the self, which I found very interesting.
Oh,
In the book, you challenge the coherence of the self. Can you explain what you mean by the fractured nature of the self and its implication?
okay. Yeah. So, that's a very deep
It
question.
is.
Yeah, and yeah, not easy to
The, f- the,
answer
f-
in a short period of time, but I'll try. So,
Let me
let
add
yeah.
something so you can also answer that.
Yes.
I just wondered that if the self is fractured, if the nature of the self is fractured, then how is the self observing who's observing the fractured self?
Yeah.
And if the self is fractured, and it seems to me like a pilot who's driving a plane, and the pilot is almost dead and
His
fractured.
manager
I
is
don't want
dead.
a fractured pilot to drive the plane. So this is very interesting, and
Yeah.
I would like to hear what you think about
Yeah.
the fractured self, and how can a fractured self reflect on itself,
Yes,
right?
I
In the
know.
sense that Okay, I am reflecting, you are reflecting, you reflected a lot on the book, on your ideas, on your personal experiences through this fractured self. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So to start, it just like this is maybe the whole concept of your subconscious versus your consciousness, which is there are multiple influences and factors that are constantly churning in your subconscious that are almost delivering input to your consciousness, and you're making decisions without understanding what's happening. And
Yes.
I noticed it while writing, actually, or anybody who writes or journals, they can notice that. Do you know how you have a friend who, when they
I don't
text,
have any friends.
yeah, like it could be, or maybe when you make a friend, let's say, there could be a friend
Yeah.
who is extremely when you were face to face with them, they're very warm, very nice, very
Yeah.
kind, but in the text they come off very cold and
Yeah.
no lack of emotions.
Definitely.
And there is vice versa. I meet people who are let's say a bit shy. They have maybe social anxiety when they
Yeah.
meet someone,
Yeah.
and they're not very expressive in
Mhm.
one to one. But on the text, I'm noticing that they have depth and
Yeah.
dimension. I, I paid attention to it, and I
Mhm.
also noticed it in myself. It's funny enough. So I started researching on neuroscience. It looks like when you are speaking, when you are writing, when you are pondering, you are using different regions of your brain at the same time to to exercise this thing that you're trying to do. So, for example, when we are sitting down pondering in our daydreaming effect, there is the default mode network, which is three regions in your brain that are, let's say, governing and policing everything else. So it's in charge of what's happening. When
Mhm.
you are active, there's a different region. I think it's called active dorsal network, something like that. DAN, it's called it, and that there is a different region that it is takes effect in your brain when you're acting. And I believe the language center in your brain is mostly in the left hemisphere.
Okay.
And when you're pondering or when you're thinking, as you say, the right versus left hemisphere. Now, of course, it's not as reductionist as this.
Exactly.
There is a lot more interplay between them, but there is more of a specialization or
Yeah.
expertise in your head. So when I'm speaking, I notice that I do exhibit different micro characteristics in how I express myself than when I write.
Mhm.
And I noticed it like in something that could be an example. I noticed that when I speak, I always speak about liking chocolates, but when I write, I always write about liking cheesecake.
Yes, I remember that.
And I mentioned it also in the book. I paid attention to it, and I noticed that we could have a different writing self than a speaking self,
Mhm.
and it could be also different behaving self, and it could also be there was a different experience in the book that who you are, who you think you are, is not just limited to yourself in your own body in isolation. It's also contingent on your environment, the people around you, and how you feel. For example, I think you probably can agree with me on this. Don't you notice uh, in all of the relationships you've had in your life, in your family, with your exes and current, like let's say, girlfriend, don't you notice that different people highlight or diminish different aspects in your character? For example, I notice there are some people where I can organically, I find myself more funny with.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are more people who I find myself more deep with, and
Mhm.
and it's not that it's interchangeable. I cannot be deep with that
Yeah.
person. It's just I don't feel my depth even
Yeah.
there. It's not just I don't feel their depth. I don't
Yeah.
feel my depth. I feel like also that adds to it. So I'm like in my mind, are we who we truly are as we think we truly are, or are we just repeating? Are we just like what I call it, like pretending
Mhm.
it to be all the time?
Yeah.
Like, are we just pretending? So I have an idea of who I am and I'm pretending it. And that brings us to the topic of consciousness. Like, no one knows what it is. It's probably the longest standing debate in between philosophers and
Yeah.
neuroscientific
Mhm.
world about what is consciousness. No one can really put their finger on what this thing is.
Yeah.
I think without, of course, truly understanding it, I can understand its limits, and especially if you've ever tried psychedelics, uh, you can almost not without reading or thinking it, you can feel the expansion of it. Because what I believe, and I mentioned it in the book, when you take a psychedelic in a therapeutic setting. I'm not
Yeah.
taking it in a completely uncontrolled setting, but
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
with a controlled setting. I
Okay.
read Michael Pollan's book, How to
Mhm.
Change Your Mind, which I it taught me how to do it in the right
Mhm.
way. You can see that your consciousness starts encroaching or expanding into your subconscious, which is why I'm starting to become more aware of my sensory input.
Mhm.
Lights are more vivid. I can
Mhm.
see spectrum of
Mhm.
colors. The music I'm listening to, it's no longer just a tune. It's I can break it down. I can sense the layers in
Yeah.
there. The sensations are overwhelming. I can feel the senses are combining together because I feel my consciousness is expanding to encroach on my subconscious. So you start feeling these influences on me a lot more. You start feeling like the interconnectivity between you and the people around you in the room.
Okay.
So this thing, doing quite a few of those psychedelic, let's say, therapeutic
Yeah.
sessions, have allowed me to also see it like
Yeah.
in that perspective too.
Yeah.
But it just goes into saying that the self that we know it is not limited, because it's limited to your speaking self and your conscious self.
Mhm.
But once you understand all the other factors that are influencing, constantly nudging on your subconscious, and how all of that, like let's say, translates or even comes up into your conscious level where you think it's you, who you are. And that also goes into the topic of free will.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
are
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
are we truly free-willed
Before you
agents?
jump to the
Yeah.
topic of free will, I like that you mentioned psychedelics, and I tried psychedelics, and I think they're valuable, and especially with the right set and setting, and the right thought behind it. If you think about a path that you want to take while you're yeah, taking this psychedelic trip. So my question is, when it comes to psychedelics, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I think about it. But psychedelics is how do you know that you're expanding your consciousness and not just intoxicated and not just
Yeah.
a feeling, for example, when you, no one romanticizes when you're
Yeah.
drunk. No one
Yeah.
says, okay, I
Yeah,
had a
true.
couple of whiskey drinks
True.
and I start sensing that the music is different and I start loving other people more. So you wouldn't say that you're expanding your consciousness there. You would just say, okay, this guy is drunk. So, so probably they
if
have less
Yeah, if anything, drinking
controls.
it hinders your
Yeah,
consciousness.
and
You feel it
less grip,
cripples. Yeah.
less grip over your conscious, very strict self
Yeah.
when you're under the influence on where you text. What's how does it does psychedelics differ in expanding your
Yeah.
consciousness and not you're just intoxicated? Even
Yeah.
though I believe that there's a lot of benefit
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
can take from a psychedelic
Yeah.
trip.
So I, I I'm not an expert. I'm an expert in let's say using the psychedelic, but I'm not an expert in trying to analyze. But
Yeah,
I
yeah,
did my research,
yeah.
to be honest on it. I recommend reading a book, How to Change Your Mind, and also there is a Netflix series
Mhm.
by Michael Pollan.
Yeah.
He's a very influential author also on my writing, because Michael Pollan, in most of his writing, he tries to leave you with a contradictory views or
Yes.
uh, conclusions
Mhm.
at the end, always at the conclusion. He's trying to make peace with them, like it's, but he's always grounded in scientific inquiry,
Okay.
journalistic scientific inquiry. And in the book, he of course interviewed neuroscientists on the topic, which they've done a lot of fMRI
Mhm.
research on it. So apparently, what happens on the psychedelic compounds resembles a lot our serotonin, and it binds into, I think it's called the 5-HT2TA, HT2A or H2TA receptor in our
Okay.
brains, which is where the serotonin binds.
Mhm.
So that leaves serotonin free flowing in your brain.
Mhm.
And serotonin is a neurotransmitter. And now, once it's free flowing, uh, it leads to a lot of extra neurogenesis and synaptogenesis in your brain. So, as I mentioned, when we are sober, and that happens through evolutionary biology, you are not paying attention to the influx or the bombardment of data and energy constantly directed at your sensory instruments.
Yeah.
You're not aware of it, and
Yeah.
that's done on purpose.
You're selectively choosing things,
Yes,
or you're unconsciously selecting.
in your subconscious, it filters out a lot of things that are unnecessary because it
Mm.
just went through 30 years without paying attention to it.
Mhm.
And I give the example of that even in my book. It's called sensory adaptation.
Mhm.
Your senses are in your subconscious without you even knowing that that thing happens. It promotes or reduces the intensity of your senses based on your environment. For example, I gave the example of when you are in an Indian restaurant, the moment you're in, you're engulfed with the aroma.
Mhm.
Your senses are overwhelmed, especially your nose, your olfactory senses are overwhelmed. You start like feeling, okay, it's too much. But after 10 minutes,
Yes.
you get used to it. Like it flattens, right? Like it
Yes.
goes from peak into like, okay, flat. So your senses are creating a baseline of what is now acceptable because it needs to pay attention to the changes,
Okay.
just like how dogs react, how we react,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now this is a change. And the same thing when you're in a movie theater. If somebody turns on their phone, you're
Yeah.
like, oh, it annoys you. But if somebody turns on your phone in daylight, you're
Yeah.
like, you didn't even see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
So psychedelics with the free flow of serotonin, I mean, I'm reducing it, of course, but there
Yeah.
is a much more depth into it. It causes your brain to interconnect. So now all of a sudden there are certain brain regions or synapses in your brain that are interacting
Mhm.
that are not necessarily operating when you are sober.
Mhm.
And I know we know now why it's done when you're sober.
Mhm.
So when you are on the psychedelic, the purpose of it is, and I think Michael Pollan explained it very nicely in his book. He said, think of it as when you are thinking about an issue or when you have a certain way of living in your life. Think of it as you're skiing down a mountain,
Yeah.
a slope.
Yeah.
And the more you ski, the more you have like a paved pathway that you tend to always go towards.
Mhm.
The grooves are already set.
Yes.
So you always tend to go towards that.
Yeah.
How our brain operates is similar way. It's like over 30, 40, 20 years of living,
Okay.
there are certain neural pathways that are
That
favored.
that have path that is paved,
It's paved.
that you think about this kind of way of thinking
Exactly.
without even
Without even knowing, you
knowing.
just traverse the same neural pathway as you always do
Yeah.
because it's a reductionist approach, and this is because our mind still thinks that we're in the savannah. You need to think quickly. Just
Okay.
go over that way. I'm not going to recalculate it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to think it again.
Okay.
So
And
that was
when you take psychedelics, you're paving other
thank
path.
you. That's what I was going with
Yeah.
this
Okay.
exactly. And it's not my conclusion. I mean, I sensed that experientially when I'm on the at the peak of the psychedelic, let's
Yes.
say, trip. I experienced it, but anybody who's been on a real psychedelic trip, the only thing they could say is it's ineffable, it's indescribable,
Yeah.
which is I cannot put that experience into words. And if I try to put it into words, it feels I'm reducing it. So what we're doing is a bit of a reduction to what you truly experience
Yeah.
because life right now or the sober state of our mind
Mhm.
craves coherence,
Mhm.
craves a narrative that is coherent
Mhm.
and craves a flow. But the psychedelic experience is anything but.
Knocks you off the rails.
Yes, it knocks you off the rails, but it still feels real.
Yeah.
Like you start understanding life from its chaotic essence, not from its orderly, conscious based essence,
Mhm.
where everything has to follow a certain narrative,
Yeah.
everything has to follow a certain flow, everything has to follow cause and effect, and this and this and this. You start seeing a world of like in its totality, which is overwhelming,
Yeah.
which is like psychedelic can be terrifying.
Yeah,
It
because you
can,
can also, Khaled, just you can
no,
also see. Uh, y- so my issue with some interpretations of what happens when you take psychedelics is how do you know? Because it's mostly dressed in this spiritual kind of dress,
yes,
beautiful spiritual dress.
yes,
Some people see God, some people see the universe, some people feel connected to the universe. Some people, when you are in nature, which I tried, you see the trees breathing, you see
interconnectivity. You
but
feel you're part of it
but
too.
as a more person who's inclined towards, I will always try to understand and explain something as much as I can with reason, and then if I can't, then okay, I can't. But I would say when you're on a psychedelic trip and you're looking at this tree and the tree is moving, then your vision is distorted.
Yeah,
Your vision is distorted.
yeah.
You cannot see properly. I wouldn't want to drive when I
No,
So
No, no.
I would want to
Uh,
drive when I'm sober. I would want to
yeah.
do those things when I'm sober. So this is why, in my opinion, a psychedelic trip is really important into because it paves a new path, a new
Yes.
thinking. The way
It
you were
offers
explaining
you. It offers you
exactly.
an alternate pathway to your regular,
Yeah,
let's say, patterned and let's say proven ways
yeah,
of living. So
yeah.
it just offers you an alternate. So here is where it helps, and this is again not my own conclusions, just from a scientific research. Apparently, scientific research is more effective against trauma, against PTSD,
Hmm.
against depression, against addiction than traditional drugs.
Yes,
And
that
I
are
mean,
actually addictive.
yes, yes, exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
That are actually
yeah,
addictive. Yeah, exactly.
they're addicted. So
Yeah,
you're addicted to some kind of drug, or so you end up
you
taking
get
another
hooked up on
medication.
pills. Yeah, you get hooked up on pills to just
Yeah, yeah,
alleviate yourself
yeah.
from your other addiction. It's funny, but really, but when you see it, it's maybe the point to see is it could it's not also that seeing the the trees or inanimate object breathing it's not a useless act. Let me tell you why. Because as I told you, over years and years and years of getting stuck or limited to a certain neuropathway of thinking,
Yeah.
which comes from a reductionist
Yeah.
upbringing and view of the world and how our species mainly evolves,
Hmm.
it offers you an alternate path. But that alternate path is not necessarily inaccurate. It could be a supplemental view to the one that when you return back to it after doing it a few times, you return back to your comment. So now all of a sudden, I am walking in nature. I do not miss the tree anymore. So I started walking in nature, feeling a lot more connected to it than I did before.
Hmm.
So if you again, the key is doing it in a therapeutic setting, because
Hmm.
if you do it in a non-therapeutic setting, you're not extracting these values.
Yeah.
Because as you said, you are very, very gullible, impressionable at that state, and many things could change and alter
Yeah.
your thoughts. And that could be negative, as you said.
Yeah.
It could be negative. But if done correctly, even an anxious or a bad trip on what they call could be beneficial,
Could
because
learn something from it.
it offers you an alternate perspective, and a perspective that you could notice.
Okay.
So I started, after doing quite a few of them, it helped me understand nuance, it helped me understand nature, it helped me understand my interconnectivity, not just with nature but with the people around me,
Hmm.
and how all of that influences me.
Hmm.
So it helped me not just pay attention to my own agency in changing my life, but also how can I pay attention to changing the circumstances? For example, it's not just the tree is there on its own; it needs a fertile soil, it needs a healthy, let's say, constellation of like fungi and things of that sort, and microbiota and all of the other things. Like now we know, and the moment you start becoming aware of it, you can apply it to your own life. So it was a very enlightening, revelatory thought that
No
you
doubt.
come up with afterwards.
No
Yeah.
doubt. Khaled, let's move to point number six, which is about something very important, especially nowadays, especially with social media, and it's storytelling. So everyone is in consensus that storytelling is very important, storytelling. And I see that throughout your book, there's a lot of good storytelling. So you're weaving this very nice story. It shows the skills,
Yes.
and it shows that, yes,
Yeah.
there's something as good storytelling. Um, what role does storytelling help us to make sense of the world? So,
Mm,
how does storytelling help us make sense of the world, um, and how you use this in your writing?
mm,
And tell us a little bit about storytelling, and because
yeah.
you master it in a way in throughout your book.
Uh, uh, I do not know. So I don't think that there is an inherent, like, let's say, objective value in storytelling. I just believe that our anthropomorphic existence, like our human existence, is
Yeah.
somehow contingent on it. And I don't know, it just appeals to the best part of our primal nature, which is, if you think about it, we're multifaceted species,
Hmm.
and I think that's part of what made us who we are.
Hmm.
If you look at all the other species around the world, they're hyper specialized. For example, you notice that there is like some sort of insects or birds that are only eating one thing
Yeah.
and dependent on one thing alone,
Flying towards
flying
one
towards it. Like
place.
it's a very hyper specialized mechanism. It doesn't allow them to think a lot. But humanity, we're omnivorous, which means like we eat multiple different, a variety of different
Yeah.
things. Our physical structure is set up in a way that allows us to also interact and deal with different challenges,
Hmm.
whether we are arboreal on a tree or whether we're on the ground, we
Hmm.
can walk, we can run. And the storytelling, I believe, combines all of these factors. We have a very a brain that tries to also look at challenges in a logical, rational way and cooperate and do it together. And I believe storytelling brings all of these elements together.
Yeah.
How are we looking at all of these? I would say, because you know how your senses are optimized to look for energy and facts that are conducive to your own survival as a species.
Hmm.
And storytelling takes all of them together. What are the things that are good for us? Uh,
So you're saying in a way that there's lots of points that lots of points out there, and a good story connects those points together
yes,
and makes a
yes,
nice
exactly. In a
drawing out of it.
metaphorical way, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
In a metaphorical way, I believe this is what a good storyteller does, and it also appeals to the most evolved part of our existence, which is our conscious mind,
Hmm.
which I believe is an emergent thing that came recently in the history of Homo sapiens
Yeah.
existence on Earth. Because before that, I don't think we were as conscious. We started acquiring language slowly. We started expressing ourselves slowly, and we started noticing that expression that appeals, first of all, to our primal instincts and appeals and weaves it together in a rational way to our emotional primal part with the intellectual part.
Yeah, it gives it some intellectual depth
Exactly.
in a way.
So, I mean, it's used, unfortunately, a lot more negatively than
Exactly.
positively. I mean, if you
Exactly.
look at conspiracy theory artists, if you look at corrupt
Cult
politicians,
leaders,
cult leaders, they are
politicians,
they are
exactly.
extreme, very well, like,
Storytellers,
yeah, yeah, good
excellent
example
storytellers.
of
Yeah.
a very expert storytellers that brings ideas and thoughts in a way that captivates you because they talk about, oh, why think about what happened, how, for example, not Marilyn Manson, like as you said, these extreme cult leaders, serial killers,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how they assimilated this
Yeah.
cult following. They start to appeal to their basic instinct of desire. Why are you here? What do you want to do? And then they offer them, let's say, a way out of their misery, for
Yeah.
example, and they
Yeah,
present
but a
it in a way.
meaning also, they give
Yeah,
them
they give them
meaning
meaning.
through this narrative.
Yes,
But so I wonder sometimes, is meaning just a narrative that is manipulated with a nice font and a
it's
nice
an
this is
interesting
what
outtake.
meaning is.
It's an interesting take on it. So I think this is also another flaw of our expression in a linguistic way.
Yeah.
You know, I I think I dove into it. Maybe if we have a question about language, we can dive into it deeper. But if you think about it, um, we tend to think of the idea of meaning or the word meaning
Hmm.
as an independent, but it encompasses a lot of stuff because when we speak in words, the 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 depth of the word is limited to the the boundaries of it, but actually it goes beyond that. And when I read Jacques
Yeah, like
Derrida,
words in a sense, words box meaning.
yes,
They shrink meaning.
exactly, and the same. The
Yeah.
word meaning is encapsulating meaning. We're
Yeah. Yeah.
having
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
a meta meaning
Yeah.
conversation, right?
Yeah.
Which is what is the meaning of meaning? But if you think about it, meaning, we use the word meaning to describe abstract concepts of things that are not necessarily all meaning the same thing. So, for example, I believe there are objective meanings in life,
Hmm.
no matter who you are, and I believe there are, as you said, manufactured or illusory meaning that we also can follow, which
Hmm.
is how storytelling or corrupt leaders or cult leaders
Yeah.
are actually employing on how to get their
Yeah.
followers, like how to get more following. So what happens is there is such a thing as objective meaning, which is no one can tell you, which is which is the same parameters of meaning that allowed us to exist: the Goldilocks zone,
Hmm.
the fertile soil, the the existence of water in its current state, in its liquid state. So without this, like drinking water, is a meaningful act.
Hmm.
Uh, Spending time with your tribe, with your loved ones, is a meaningful act. I think that's objective. I think it does. That's beyond what you think.
Hmm.
Even if you think you're an introvert, even if you think, you're a loner, you need time with people. I think
Yeah.
it helps. Even if you don't like it, it might still be good for you. Even if you dislike it,
Okay.
even then, these are, I believe, meaning is a mix of objective and subjective origins.
And
But
it comes in stories. This
yes,
is what you were trying to
yes,
say.
exactly,
So it's not
exactly.
that the meaning can exist without a nice
Yes,
package, which is
yes,
a story. But here there's comes a danger, which you know about the sophists,
yes,
how they're debating and winning an argument is an art. So you get paid if you know how to tell a good story, and
yeah,
it becomes that a narrative becomes an end in itself. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not about okay, I am weaving this very nice story to get to somewhere, and you see it a lot now with a lot of public
A hundred
intellectuals.
percent, a
They're
hundred percent.
charming,
Yes,
they're verbal, they have big vocabulary, they're very smart and charismatic, so they can really captivate you when you're listening to them. But at the same time, you have this icky feeling that where is this leading? There's a lot of things that you can understand from a very complicated narrative that looks nice. It's different than when you have solid facts. Okay, this is how we function, da, 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 da. But when you try to weave it with a very nice narrative, it becomes dangerous. For example, you have lots of religions that have different kinds of
correct.
narratives.
And religion is the best storytellers,
Yeah,
actually. They're
yeah,
the
yeah,
best
exactly,
storytellers.
exactly.
Yeah, I
Now,
completely
how
believe in it.
accurate it is, we can
Yeah,
come back to that
yes,
later.
yes,
Now,
yeah,
let's move to
yeah,
uh, another question,
yes.
which is
I
about
love your questions. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
they're really on point.
yeah, about perception. So this
Yeah.
question is about mainly about perception. So many readers struggle with blind trust in their emotions or intellect. What practical steps can someone take to begin questioning their own perceptions?
Mm. So it just goes into, in the dark ages of Europe, they it was a period like marred with ignorance, disease, like lack of proper behavior, and that was a time when Europeans forgot the essence of Greek philosophy, which is like thoughts that, they say all Western philosophy is derived from Greek philosophy, which is
Yes.
3,000 years ago,
Hmm.
almost 2,500 years ago, and it just there is a saying in there. I think Socrates said, "Know thyself,"
Yeah.
and I think it all starts with that. So the key is not to neglect or doubt your emotions and intellect. The key is to be aware of them.
Okay, this is important.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like, I think the first step. It's like, as they say in anything that happens in life. If you The first step to fixing any problem is just to understand and acknowledge that you
Yeah.
have one.
Yeah.
I think this is the first step that applies into this. So we want to understand, first of all, how our psyche operates, how our emotions and how our thoughts operate, and be aware of them. And I think this is why you can see, just speaking about multidisciplinary, let's say, thinking, how meditation also comes and becomes a powerful technique
Hmm.
here. Because the thing that everyone teaches you in whatever form of meditation you're doing, is to be aware of your own thought and not detach yourself from it.
Okay.
It's like you are not the thought, you are observing it for a moment.
Hmm.
And the key in doing that is not to is to you're building, or you're exercising a muscle in your brain
Yeah.
that doesn't react to each thought or emotion as it comes, because we're living in a world that doesn't require it. I believe, let's say, if for whatever reason all of our modernity vanished and electricity is no longer there, we might forget about all of this higher thinking and sophisticated thinking. We might go back to our primal urges because we need to react quickly.
Hmm.
But in our current modern world, with everything that we have, we probably don't need to react and identify with each thought and emotion as we are doing most of the time.
Okay.
So the starting point is awareness and observation. And I think from there, once you start becoming aware and observe, if you meditate and you start to see the distance and you're no longer reacting to it, I believe the art, and this is something I struggled with in meditation, is when a thought is just running through my head and I can't seem to take it away. How can I drop it without arriving at a conclusion? Because every time when we're stuck at a thought,
Hmm.
there is a problem that you have, you're tired at work, in your relationship with your family, we always think that thinking about it long enough.
We'll solve it.
No, yeah, yeah, exactly, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't, because the more you think about it, the more you're stuck in it.
Yeah.
And maybe the best thing to do is to drop it
Okay.
and
But
being
how do you
aware of
fix
it.
it?
But being aware of it. So that's that comes. You don't want to. We go to Einstein. You don't want to fix it with the same level of thinking. You need
Okay.
to take a step back, relax, and try to look at
Take
it
some
from a different
psychedelics.
angle.
Change your point of view.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that could
Yeah,
be
yeah,
one
yeah, yeah,
option.
yeah.
That
It's
could be
just a
one
good
option.
recipe.
But it could
Don't
be.
take psychedelics.
Don't take. But it's maybe not psychedelics. Maybe meditate.
Yes.
Maybe go for a run. Maybe give it, let it park, and come back to it tomorrow. I believe that that helps a lot. Like a lot of times, even I told you when I was developing a full stack, I was stuck sometimes trying to make a function work, and I was just so stuck. No matter how far I thought about it, it
Hmm.
was stuck. And I said, you know what? Leave it. Do something else.
Hmm.
The next day, I come back to it with a fresh mindset, and then,
Yeah.
and that happens everywhere.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So I believe like just being aware. Okay, I am stuck. I am understanding my emotions, or this emotion is not completely accurate, and understanding also what's the purpose of these emotions. This emotion I'm feeling right now, I'm feeling agitated, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling anxious. What message is it trying to send me?
Hmm.
Yeah. A lot of times we start thinking about the past or thinking about the future aimlessly. And if you're doing that, maybe dropping it has no ramifications. You know
Hmm.
what I mean?
Hmm.
Or I'm thinking about something that happened in the past and I'm stuck and now it's making me anxious. It happens to me a lot.
Hmm.
Dropping it sometimes, I'm like, yeah, what's the point? Why was I stuck? Because you don't
Yep.
understand that your mind tends to go on these cycles
Yes.
without any justification. It just loves to do it. As I
Yeah.
told you, to a hammer everything is a nail, to a
Yeah.
mind everything is a thought.
Khaled, I cannot help but wondering that most people don't want the truth, to know the truth. No one, or at least they think they want the truth, but they don't want their
You're right.
worldview to be shattered.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They just want comfort, stability, and some the nice narrative.
Yeah.
So no one is thinking about thinking and thinking why they're thinking this way and whether all these things. Isn't it dangerous sometimes to teach people to destroy their worldview without providing a worldview that comes in place so they don't end up in this
Yeah.
like not so good zone in their life
Yeah, yeah.
where they might hold on to something even worse? This is I find that very interesting. Like, okay, what would people hold on to if their worldview is shattered?
Hmm.
There will be a vacuum.
Yeah, I mean, this problem you're speaking about is a problem that I think Friedrich Nietzsche he dived into when he said God is dead and we have killed him, and something Jordan Peterson talks a lot about. But I also read it in his. He's a phenomenal thinker, and I think what he mentioned by it
Nietzsche,
is
right?
Nietzsche,
Okay.
and what he said. No, no, not Peterson. I'm not a
No,
big fan.
Peterson is very smart, but I
Yeah,
thought,
he's
okay,
smart,
this
but
is
I'm not a
very
big fan. Yeah, yeah, he's a controversial figure. But anywho, to this point, when he mentioned God is dead and we have killed him, he was not saying it in a proud and triumphant way. He was
yeah.
saying it in a way where he's actually concerned and
Hmm.
deeply concerned. And to be honest with you, I think he was correct because he was saying if religion becomes diminished and abolished, which
Yeah.
is what's happening right now, where are people gonna derive their moral values? How are they? What framework are they gonna use? Are they gonna be lost? And without diving too deep into to answer your question, I think we are already there.
Yes.
I think most of us are already like a plastic bag in the wind, flowing wherever it takes it,
Yeah.
and we're getting attached to whatever thing or narrative. Religion. This is a problem. It's not a problem to do things or join a tribe of a certain thought or action or like let's say CrossFit or I'm into Harley Davidson or but the problem is people become religious about these things
Hmm.
because I believe there is a factor in us we want to belong into a
Yeah.
tribe where we identify with this is where I derive my
But it seems that
morality
it's
from.
something that's ingrained in us, and it's
Yes,
very important.
yes.
So if you drop your Christian, you drop Christianity. Okay, I don't think that there's a God,
Yeah, where are you
etc.
deriving all of this from? And I think now Nietzsche came up with an answer to it. He said he came up with the concept of the Übermensch, which is completely misunderstood
Yeah.
nowadays. But what he meant by the Übermensch is he said in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he said the man is the bridge between the animal and the Übermensch.
Hmm.
The human being is the bridge between
Yeah.
the animal, our animal basic instinct, and the
Yeah.
Übermensch is like our higher, sophisticated, more ambitious way of existence, which
Hmm.
is the Übermensch. Which is Übermensch is overcoming, let's say,
This
these
animal.
this animal, exactly, overcoming
Okay.
the animal, or let's say having your hands on the handle of the animal, not
Yeah.
the opposite way. And I
Okay.
think this is it was misinterpreted. His sister took his narrative and she made it about
So
the
her husband was a Nazi,
Nazi.
so
Yeah, 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 exactly.
sympathize.
So she
Yeah.
misportrayed that, and unfortunately, this is not brought a lot. It's still tarnished by that
Yeah.
view. But what he meant is a very in a very abstract and philosophical way is overcoming this up. Is how when you are stuck in this situation, and he kind of predicted that we will be stuck in this
Yeah.
position.
Yeah.
You need to overcome yourself, overcome yourself, and be able to extract and create values or meaning, as you were talking about before, from that. And how do you do it? How do you do it without understanding everything that ticks you?
You join CrossFit.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So you join cross, but there are, as I told you, I am there are people religious about politics. There are
Yes.
people religious about the environment, and not that these topics are not righteous or correct on their
Mm-hmm.
own, but being religious about it is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, how can we live without being religious about these things that we identify with? This is where the Ubermensch comes.
Mm.
I have my grip on the handle. I can dip my toes. I can swim in that water, but I don't need to be identified with it because I know I can. I cultivate it, and I cultivated and I'm practicing a set of values that are
Yeah.
aligned with the objective existence of reality. Now, what is objective existence of reality? That's a whole different topic we might never ever be able to know
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
as I told you, the thing in itself, as Kant said, might never ever be perceptible to us, but we can, there are still beyond the subjective meanings, beyond the subjective morality, there is a set of objective also facts and morality that can drive us towards an effective and optimal way of living.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is what we should. My aim was is similar to what Nietzsche's aim was: is not to dismantle and leave you without any tools, but is to equip you with the tools to deal with the current, let's say, unguided and lost path that we might find ourselves in. And I think many of us, different periods of your life, you might not be having it now, but you may have had it in the past, or you will have it in the future. You might find yourself aimlessly going without finding this checkpoint or this goalpost that we're all seeking.
Yeah.
So this was my aim. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think there's something that people need to have in their lives. And I think there's a difference between joining, for example, a CrossFit gym and then being a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew. Um, so the difference is in what your beliefs are anchored. So when your beliefs are anchored in something that transcends nature and life and yourself,
exactly.
it gives you more of a comfortable feeling. It puts you into your place that, okay, I am small, I am weak, I am all these things, but at the same time, I am like that, but there's something much larger, which is which is meaning. So if
Exactly.
I anchor myself in this very big idea, I have a better meaning in life, which I find it important. I find it fascinating, and
Crucial.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
and I think there's different takes on meaning in life. For example, Albert Camus,
Mhm.
um, he thinks that in the myth of Sisyphus, for example, he
Mhm.
thinks that, okay, you have to, let's translate the myth of Sisyphus to our real life. You have to go to work every day. You have to do all these things. Better be happy and enjoy doing these things and do these things in a proud way. And these things will stop becoming a struggle, will stop becoming like a punishment.
Correct.
Okay, so he's trying to give this other framework in a way that, okay, you cannot escape it.
Yeah.
I would love to be this all rational being that is just sitting somewhere and just disconnected from all uh, bad things in life, but it's not possible. What is
Yeah.
possible
Yeah.
is how I carry myself,
Yeah.
and the small. All right, Khaled. So we seem to be having a technical issue with the camera.
Phew. Yeah. Don't know what happened.
So we're gonna continue. We were about to wrap up with the final thought, and which is a message to readers. How do you hope readers will use the insights from fantasy worlds to reshape their understanding of themselves and their lives?
Yeah. Great question. So the main point which I wanted myself, because I started writing the book as more exploratory journey on my own, trying to understand how my own perceptions work alongside the objective reality that's unfolding in front of me, and trying to understand the mechanics. So just to wrap up, or to summarize everything I discussed thoroughly in the book, is I'm trying to understand the mechanics of all the influences that are impacting our subconscious, which in turn are impacting our conscious experience. And there are quite a few of them, from our senses to our culture to our upbringing to our own biology to our own circumstances, unique subjective circumstances, and they all translate to how we map all of this input into an image that we see the world through. Uh, the main point, which is something we discussed before, it's know thyself, understand the confluence of factors that are impacting and shaping your choices all the time. And by being aware of them, the point is not to diss them or neglect them or throw them in the trash. It's the point is to uh, maybe steer them, maybe nudge them in a certain direction, and maybe understand when your emotions are giving you some sort of perspectives that are not aligning with what's effective or for you at this moment in time. Uh, I always return back to hangry. If we realize that we're angry while we're hungry, maybe we should not pay attention to the anger and maybe have a meal, rest for a bit, and then engage in a discussion that might be a lot more productive. And I think you can apply the same method to different parts of our lives. And that will, in turn, in my view, I started giving a lot more compassion to myself and to people around me without always judging them directly or trying to come up with a instinctive, right on the spot, quick conclusion about what's happening. Is taking a step back, analyzing and understanding that there could be multiple factors to why things aren't going my way or in a certain way, and see how you can nudge it in a way that matches your own objectives, and that could happen in so many different ways. But acquiring the mindset and framework to do it is, I believe, what could be conducive in this journey. So the benefit of all of this, someone asked me, is what do I gain? I always say it's compassion, compassion to yourself, compassion to people around you, by understanding the nuance, not just taking things for face value, understanding the nuances and all the layers that are leading you to where you are. And but when you understand these layers, you can understand how to shape them, influence them. You could also maybe changing your environment. If something is not working for you, you don't need to change your own behavior. You need to change your environment. Many things could be done.
Nice, Khaled. I think this is a great message for all the readers, and I really advise everyone to try to give this book a chance. It is really all inclusive. It has a lot of ideas, a lot of solid and deep philosophical and scientific ideas. And finally, from my side, I really think that battling and making a real change in life is something that is done on the mental, psychological, and bodily part as well. So it is, you need to change your life. You need to be aware, know thyself,
Correct. Yeah.
and act upon it. So you need
Yes.
also to create a routine for yourself, create habits, create rituals, and understand all the influences that are
Hmm.
playing a role in your life. And on this note, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
And yeah, to be continued.
Thank you, Joey. No, it's been amazing discussion. I think I always wanted to have it with you because I love your insight, specifically on these topics. I love your challenging questions, and looking forward to our next discussions. I think we can expand more on it.
Thank you, and until next time.
Yeah, take care.
Okay, I think it was recording.
Yeah,
Is it still
we can
recording?
hear it. Yeah.